So Namo Buddhaya, Bhante Revata, from Maha Bodhi Society, Bengaluru, from Maha Bodhi Research Center. I heartily welcome you, Bhante. Can you hear me, Bhante?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
But our video and audio is clear?
I think so. It looks very clear. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Okay. So, Bhante, how do you like me to start? Shall I give you an introduction first, or we will start with offering our puja, Buddha puja?
Please go ahead with the Buddha Puja first, Bhante.
Yes, we will. I think that is the best way to start. We will offer a short chanting first together, and then I will give introductions to Bhante Revata, followed by the Dhamma talk, then the question and answers, and at the end we will also share the merits. Use the slide as a candle contain. Bhante, we will do Buddha Dhamma Sangha Vandana.
Okay, Bhante. Excuse me.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddhassa sampanno sukhato lokavidu. Anuttaro purisadhamma sarati sattva deva manussanam buddho bhagavati. Namo tassa samma sambuddhassa. Swakhato bhagavata dhammo sanditiko akaliko. Ehi passiko panayiko pacchattam veditavvo vinyo yeti. Namo tassa niyānika sadhammassa. Subhadipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Budhupatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Nyaya patipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Sāmici patipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Yadidam cattari purisa yugani artha purisa puggala. Esa bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Ahuneyo pahuneyo dattineyo anjali karaniyo. Anuttaram punyam ketam lokasati. Namo tassa ariya bhogala sangassa. Avadu sabba mangalam lakhantu sabba devata sabba bhutani bhavena saraswati bhavantu te. Avadu sabba mangalam lakhantu sabba devata sabba dhammani bhavena saraswati bhavantu te. Avadu sabba mangalam lakhantu sabba devata Sabba sangani bhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Abhivadana silassa nityam buddha pacharino. Chattārudham pavatanti ayuvarno sukham baram. Ayu arogya sampatti sabda sampatti nirvacam. Ato nibbana sampatti vinati samiddhatu. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo Buddhaya, once again, and homage to the Blessed One, to the Perfect One, to the Supremely Enlightened One. Homage to our teacher, most venerable Acharya Revata, dear venerable Bhante Revata, and Sangha members and Dhamma friends and our professors, students of MBRC. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome today Bhante Revata from US. He had joined for this Dhamma talk, a special Dhamma talk which has been organized, a series of talks by different teachers, Dhamma scholars across the globe. And this is happening in commemorating of our teachers' 100th birth centenary. So these talks are held every fortnight, or twice in a month, 6 p.m. in Indian time. And today, let me brief about Bhante Revata. Bhante Revata is a Theravada Buddhist monk. Basically, he is born in Chittagong Hill Track in Bangladesh, and he received his Buddhist education, monastic training and meditation in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, and studied at the University of Toronto, Canada, Arizona State University, and he was a fellow at the Columbia University, New York. Bhante Revata is a contemplative teacher and a storyteller. He is residential teacher at the Chautauqua Institution at New York. I'm sorry if I pronounced wrongly. Chautauqua Institution. He also teaches online meditation and Dhamma classes at AIC. He is a co-editor of book Human Dignity, Practices, Discourses, and Transformation. His essays and writing have appeared in the Harvard Divinity Bulletin, Journal of Contemporary Buddhism, Buddhist Studies Reviews, and Journal of Religions and Popular Culture, among others publications. Defining himself as a homeless monk, as a nomadic monk, and a global citizen, he travels extensively in North America, Europe, and Asia, teaching nomad mindfulness, inner resources, active care, and human dignity. So, on Maha Bodhi Society Bangalore is very honored. Maha Bodhi Research Center, which is a research wing of Maha Bodhi Society Bangalore. And Bhante, for your kind information, you might be here heard about Maha Bodhi Society Bangalore, and this research center is part of it. And this is the initiation of our founder, Most Venerable Acharya Buddha to his wish to offer the Buddhist education in a very systematic manner to the public. And therefore, this center has been established, and we are offering diploma certificates and PhD programs and some online courses and other things. And we are also engaged in translating the Buddha Vachana into Indian languages. So we have today many students, Dhamma students, scholars, and also our regular Dhamma listeners, devotees. So I welcome everyone. Having said that, Bhante, over to you now to give your Dhamma talk. And today, Bhanteji is going to speak about, his talk is on Gijjakuta, the place, history, and importance in Indian Buddhism. So, thank you, Bhante. Namo Buddhaya.
Thank you, Bhanteji. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo Buddhaya. Enjoy being to everyone. Very good morning. Very good morning from the AIC, which is the Ambedkar International Center. Some of you, if not, Many of you probably know it. Let's see what is happening here. Oh, okay. So yeah, I do know some of the monks. Actually, I met I think 2 nuns when I was in Sri Lanka from Maha Bodhi Society from Bangalore. I do not know how many Maha Bodhi centers in Bangalore. If it is only one, probably perhaps those 2 nuns. They are sponsored by the Buddha's Light International Association, Pukanshan. So probably Bhante, you probably know them. I forgot actually their names. That it has been quite a while actually. It was probably 2004 and 2005 and 6, quite a long time ago. Anyway, so the topic that I'm greatly interested in the sense that I do not know very much about Gijjakuta, and I'm interested to know, which is why I decided to explore a little bit about Gijjakuta also. Hopefully, everyone there, except 1 or 2 maybe, are in India. You might give me even more good feedback also at the end of my talk, so that I can include in my writing process also. What is Gijjakuta or Gijjakut in Hindi probably? One may wonder, especially the people who are not familiar Buddhism, is it a history? Is it a geography? Or is it an archaeology? Or is it a place? Gijjakuta as a place and as a history has been one of my great interests since I first read an article about Gijjakuta. I do not exactly remember the year, whether it was 2000 or 2001, but let me put it this way. The years are probably between 2000 and 2002. I'm getting old now, so my memories are fading away slowly. From 2000 and 2004, I was in Burma or Myanmar at the International Theravada Buddhist University, and many of you, probably Bhante also knows it. It's one of the Theravada Buddhist universities in Southeast Asia that invites usually the foreign students. They provide free Buddhist education, including food and lodging also. And people who are interested, probably, they should probably go also there. So, which shortly we call it ITBMU, meaning International Theravada Buddhist University. At the ITBMU library, I read this article related to Gijjakut. And I do not remember again the name of the magazine or the author of the article as well. But I do remember very clearly the title of the articles. Perhaps it was the first Buddhist article that I read in English language. The title of the article was The Vulture Peak, which is the author, in which the author narrating his personal and emotional experience of the Vulture Peak when he was visiting the Gijjakuta. The Vulture Peak is some kind of literal or kind of the translation, the meaning of the Gijjakut. And he was, the author was explaining also the importance of the Vulture Peak in the Mahayana Buddhism, because the article, it's the central theme surrounded in the Mahayana Buddhism related to the Vulture Peak. So I was interested whether it was also has some kind of significance in the Theravada Buddhism also, which is why I was greatly interested in this topic. So here, the Vulture Peak is the English translation of Gijjakuta. The author of the article was a Japanese Buddhist scholar, although I have some kind of doubt that whether he was actually a Mahayana Buddhist practitioner, because he was one of the very few Japanese academic personnel who often questions or criticize the validity of Mahayana Sutras through their writings and talks. He was, no doubt, he was a very renowned Buddhist scholar, an Orientalist, prolific writer of Indian philosophy, especially the Vedic philosophy. And I'm thinking it could be Hajime Nakamura. He was very famous Indologists and scholars of India and philosopher Buddhist and Vedic scriptures. He wrote probably around 170 books or monographs, texts, and over thousands of articles, both in Japanese and English. So his writing, the book, especially the book, the title is A Comparative History of Ideas, hugely influenced on me in my academic career. Somehow I feel that there is a magic at Gijjakuta. As I was reading the article slowly, I felt the energy of Gijjakut, the vibration of this place in me. The various emotions of feelings, including the feeling of respect, the feeling of faith, a strong connection were felt in me, even though I have never been to Gijjakut. It was like, when you're in a deep samadhi or deep meditation, the feeling of joy and rapture is one of the jhana or a meditation state, the rapture you feel actually in a deep meditation. Suddenly, there is some kind of romanticization of the Gijjakut in me. The gravity was so strong that it pulls me to visit whenever I think of Gijjakut. And I wanted to know more about Gijjakut. There was no internet at the time when I was at the ITBMU University in Myanmar. And so I was not able to study more deeply. Here and now, or whenever I think of Gijjakuta, I always Google and feel incredibly happy whenever at least even though when I read something about related to Gijjakuta. The religion, geography, and history are always interlinked or interconnected, and they are alike in many places. And I cannot separate Gijjakuta from religion, in this case, Buddhism. I cannot also separate Gijjakuta from geography and history. I cannot talk about Gijjakuta unless our theory is backed by the archaeological evidences, as it is, because the Gijjakuta is the ancient religious sites or ruined site. Therefore, I feel it is necessary to put an important historical materials along with geographical information about Gijjakuta. So I will locate Gijjakuta in the historical geography of India. So in this talk, I will talk about Gijjakuta, its history, and its place in Indian religious history, geography, and archaeological perspective. So if you Google the words Gijjakuta, beside the Pali words Gijjakuta or Grijjakut in Sanskrit, and other words such as vulture peak in English, Gijjakuta in Sanskrit, or the holy eagle peak, so on and so forth, it will appear on. It is named the vulture peak according to the Pali Atthakatha or the commentarial literature because it resembles a sitting vulture with its wing folded. So according to the Pali commentaries, this place got its name because vulture uses to perch on some of the peak's rock. Gijjakuta has been the Buddha's personal space for his personal retreat, where the Buddha had spent so many days, nights, and months, and years meditating, guiding, and teaching to his disciples. Although it is less known in Indian Buddhism, let alone the Theravada Buddhism, it is where the Buddha had delivered many important suttas as recorded in the Pali Buddhist texts. It was the center for so many Buddhist monastic activities. It is also used as a communal Dharma hall where the large number of monks and nuns get together to listen the Dhamma from the Buddha and for daily meditation also. To our surprise, at least to my surprise, it was on Gijjakuta Some monks even committed suicide also, which sparked a debate on the issues or the problem of suicide in Buddhism. Thus, similar to the Isipatthana Megadaya in Saranath or Belubon Bihar or Jetobon Bihar, the places that you are or we are very familiar, Girjakuta has been the important place in early history of Indian Buddhism. Girjakuta also play a very big role for the development of Mahayana Buddhism as well in India. Mahayana Buddhists believe that many Mahayana important sutras were actually delivered at the Girjakuta by the Buddha and by his earliest disciples. Today, the Girjakuta has become a spiritual commodity, a hot spot for cultural tourism and religious travels. For instance, the government of Bihar or Bihar government, in the name of Bihar tourism, they promote Girjakuta as a tourist place rather than spiritual place for revitalizing the local economy. So the Girjakuta is no longer a place that we think of, that we know of, or describe in the Buddhist literary history. Today, Girjakuta has transformed from the Buddha's personal retreat center to the center of economic activity. So unlike the Buddhist historical sites or popular tourist sites, such as the Lumbini in Nepal, where the Buddha was born, Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha gained Buddhahood, or Isipatthana in Saranath, or where the Buddha gave his first teaching, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, or Kushinagara, where the Buddha had attained his parinirvana, the great passing away, and other places. Girjakuta has been sidelined in the Theravada Buddhist history. So why were Theravada Buddhists did not interested in or at Girjakuta? Why does Indian Buddhists historically give less importance to Girjakuta compared to other Buddhist sites? What is the contributions of Girjakuta to Indian Buddhism or to the Indian Buddhist literary history? How do we study Girjakuta? What is the significance of the place in Indian religious history? With this, some theoretical questions, among others, in this talk, I will share some of my preliminary findings about the history, the place, and the role of Girjakuta within the Indian Buddhism context. By preliminary findings, I mean it is not conclusive yet. Much more to be done, particularly from the archaeology, history, and the cross-textual examinations of Pali and Sanskrit sources. Among other things, or another thing that I want to point out is that I was not able to look at from non-Buddhist sources, non-Buddhist text sources, because I do not have access to them, such as the Jain or Hindu literature. I'm sure the Jain literature or Jain scriptures and the Hindu texts have much more to say about Girjakuta as well. You may have noticed my my repetitive uses of the words Indian Buddhism. By Indian Buddhism, I particularly want to emphasize to a historical period, or in the period where the life of the Buddha was written in India before Buddhism went to Sri Lanka and many other places in South and Southeast Asia. Today, Buddhism has been so localized, or rather nationalized, and identified by the ethnic and national identity. So we have the words in the study of Buddhism in the West, such as Sinhala Buddhism, when we refer to the Buddhism in Sri Lanka. Likewise, Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, Thai Buddhism, Mongolian Buddhism, Nepali Buddhism, Cambodian Buddhism, and so forth. When refer when we refer Buddhism to these countries. So here we have Indian Buddhism, which simply means the Buddhism in India. So when we study Indian Buddhism, the subject, which is not the simple, it is the most complicated field of the study in the study of Buddhism. And if you're interested, you may have read, or here's my suggestion, there's a few books that written quite a long, published long time ago actually. One is by A.K. Water, monumental book on Indian Buddhism, and Japanese scholar Akira Hirakawa's book, History of Indian Buddhism from Sakyamuni to Mahayana. Of course, Buddhism is no longer Indian religion. Buddhism has no religious, no national binding, boundary, or border. For me, Buddhism was never regional or national religion. Buddhism was and always been a global religion. From the history of South and Southeast and East Asia, we know that Buddhism gone beyond Indian geographic boundary since 3rd century BC onward, as it went to Sri Lanka, China, Japan, and now to the West. Recently, the word American Buddhism has been dominating in the study of Western Buddhism. At first, I was very much interested to give a talk on the topic of American Buddhism. When, how, and why so many Americans have accepted Buddhism as their religion and spiritual practices. How American Buddhists identify their distinctive American Buddhism. How distinctive is the distinctive American Buddhism? Anyway, so I will give about American Buddhism maybe in another time. As a research center, I think that people at or community members at the Maha Bodhi Research Center in India might interest on this topic for self-awareness as well as intellectual discourses, knowing that there are many other forms of Buddhism that we need to be explored and to be discussed. From the opening statement, you may have already have a sense of my interest of Gijjakutta, and yet let me explain why I'm interested in Gijjakutta. Because I would have chosen other important doctrinal or Dhamma topic, but why Gijjakutta, which is lesser known subject or topic? And I'm assuming that my previous speakers in your center may have touched many relevant topics. And I know also that somehow in my feeling that my subsequent speaker will talk also other important Dhamma topic, which is why I choose Gijjakutta as a subject and as a place for the study and exploring Indian Buddhism. Because I believe, as you will see later as we dive into the more details of the Gijjakutta, the places such as rivers, mountains, caves, trees, forests, lakes, and so forth are very important to understand Buddhism, to know the Buddha, to feel the Buddha, to see the Buddha. Because without trees, mountains, rivers, caves, forests, and lakes, the Buddha never be the Buddha. Excluding them or without them, I do not think we will completely understand Buddhism, the very nature of the Buddha Dhamma. For me, Gijjakutta is not just a place or history. Rather, I feel or I see Gijjakutta as the Dhamma body of the Buddha. You may be aware or maybe not that there is a notion of Trikaya, the three bodies of the Buddha, mostly in the Mahayana Buddhism. As much as the topic of Saddha, Vipassana, Nibbana, mindfulness, karma, or Dhamma, the topic of mountain, caves, etc. are very important to understand the essence of Buddhism. Remember, since he left his royal palace in pursuit of ultimate liberation or moksha, the Buddha spent most of his time in forests, in caves, or under the trees. What this means is that the Buddha never wanted to separate between him and the nature. Remember also that after his enlightenment at Bodh Gaya, the Buddha spent entire week appreciating and expressing his gratitude to all the places and trees that he had meditated or spent. Thus, I see there is a connection between the forest, between the cave, between the mountain and the Buddhahood. I see these places are not are our external resources to develop our inner peace and inspiration to walk in the path of the Buddha. I came from a different intellectual lineage or tradition in terms of my monastic training and a meditation training came from Myanmar or Burmese Vipassana tradition, and I follow and practice and teach accordingly. On the other hand, I was trained in different universities in the US and Canada in anthropology and history. So whatever subject that I study, of course, everything has to be related to Buddhism in academic sense. And I look at from historical anthropology and social historical point of view. The historical materials, along with the archaeological information, are so important in the study of Gijjakota. The geographical information should be supplemented by historical accounts. For historical materials, we have the Pali text, both canonical and non-canonical sources. We also have a Sanskrit text, both Buddhist and non-Buddhist. By non-Buddhist Sanskrit, I mean the Hindu and Jain texts and the travel accounts, especially the Chinese Buddhist pilgrims account. As we were talking about the approach to the study of Gijjakota, and I want to spend little time explaining the sources of Gijjakota and how do we study Gijjakota, or from what basis do we study Gijjakota. Beside the archaeological and historical sources available online, because I was not physically there when I was studying Gijjakota, for the study of Gijjakota, I have heavily rely on the Pali Buddhist literature, the language and its literature that I'm very familiar. The Pali Nikaya is the main and important source of information of Gijjakota, and it is supplemented by Atthakatha, because the detailed account of Gijjakota mostly recorded in the Atthakatha or commentarial literature, not much in the Nikaya text. The Pali word Atthakatha means commentary, explanation, or the meaning of the words. Artha in Pali, Arth in Sanskrit, means meaning. Katha means conversations or talk. So simply it refers to the non-canonical literature of the Theravada Buddhism, or simply it means commentaries to the Tripitaka, the Pali canon. And these commentaries not only give the traditional interpretation of the scriptures or the suttas, but also the Atthakatha gives the detailed account of Indian intellectual history, including the history of places, kings, queens, royal families, business people, famous individual, monastic or non-monastic, rivers, mountains, lakes, music, stories of the great person, and so on and so forth. And occasionally I have collaborated with Sanskrit Buddhist sources also, or the Mahayana literature. The traveler accounts, including the travel memoirs or diaries of the medieval Chinese monks who had visited Gijjakota. These Chinese monks' pilgrimage notes provide us the great details and the importance of Gijjakota in Indian Buddhist history. And those are actually available online now. And I trust actually the valid sources. The Pali Nikaya or Atthakatha are the classical religious literatures of India. They are very vast treasure house of information about the royalties, geography, and situations of the countries, cities, villages, and other localities, as well as the caves, mountains, rivers, lakes, parks, forests, monasteries, etc. of the vast continent of ancient India. So the question is now, where is the Gijjakota located? Today, Gijjakota is in the Rajgir in the modern state of India. Many people, you probably know it more than me. Now, let us look at how the Gijjakota is portrayed in the Pali Buddhist literature. In the Pali sources, Gijjakota is one of the 5 prominent small hills surrounding Rajagaha, the ancient capital city of Magadha. In the present day, Magadha roughly corresponds to the modern day of Patna or Gaya district of Bihar. In the time of the Buddha, the king Bimbisara was the ruler of Magadha, and Rajagaha is known as Rajgir in the modern day of India, located in the state of Bihar. In the Pali text, it is mentioned that other names as well, such as Giribaja, Boshumati, and Kushagriyapura. Rajagaha was one of the 16 states of Sullasa Maha Janapada. Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Moggallana, the right and left hand disciples of the Buddha, were also from Rajagaha. The Gautama Buddha spent many rainy seasons at Rajagaha, including at Gijjakota. So no doubt, from this, what we came to know is that Rajagaha or Rajgir was one of the earliest centers for Buddhism and Buddhist activities. King Bimbisara was the royal patroness of the Buddha, who contributed much for the propagation and development of Buddhism in India. His royal garden turned into the monastery and built a permanent vihara for the Buddha and his monastic community, or the Sangha, which is now known as Velubon Vihara. Kumara Jivaka, or Jivak Kumara Vacha, was the Buddha's personal physician and considered to be the father of Buddhist medicine. Tradition says he was the son of the prostitute of Rajagaha. However, he became a disciple, the lay disciple, an ardent follower of the Buddha. He used to treat the Buddha and the monks and nuns whenever they get sick or illness. In one sutta in the Digha Nikaya, it is said that he had a beautiful mango garden just outside the east of the gate Rajagaha, which he donated to the Buddha, and which later developed into the large monastery. The remains of this monastery were discovered in 1954 and excavated by archaeologists. Monoratha Purani, the commentary to the Anguttara Nikaya, it is mentioned that at the Gijjakota, he administered the medicine and took care of the Buddha while he was not well. The 5 hills surrounding Rajagaha mentioned in the Pali text are Bebara, Pandawa, Bipulla, Gijjakota, and Isigili. At present, the mountains around Rajgir are being called as a Vivara, Bipula, Ratana, Jata, and Shaila. The non-Buddhist sources, such as the Mahabharata, also mentions, with the Sanskrit term, obviously, Giribraja, Pali Giribaja, as well as Magadapura, when it talks about Magadha. Magadapura was well fortified or protected city because it was protected by the 5 hills. The Sanskrit names mentioned in the Mahabharata are Varatha, Brishava, Rishigiri, and Chaityaka. The mention of the Mahabharata, the Giri Braja was protected by 5 hills is strikingly similar to that of the Pali commentary, or confirmed by the Pali commentary, the Vimanavatthu commentary, or Atthakatha, in which we read that the city of Giribaja was encircled by the mountains Isigili, Bipulla, Bhairava, Bevara, Pandava, and Kichakuta. And the word Kichakuta is a Pali compound consisting of the words Gija and Kuta. The Buddha was attracted to Gijakuta because of its solitude and peaceful environment. The Pali Samyutta Nikaya records that the Buddha had visited Gijakuta on so many occasions for so many events, sometimes even in the dark, in drizzling rain. At one time, even the Mara, the devil, made several unsuccessful attempts to frighten the Buddha not to visit Gijakuta. We all know the story of Devadatta, at least some extent. He was the cousin and the brother-in-law of Siddhartha Gautama. The accounts of his life, the Devadatta's life, vary greatly, but he is generally portrayed in the Pali Buddhist sources as an evil person, as a bad person, or very divisive figure in early Buddhism. He even attempted to murder the Buddha. According to the Vinaya Pitaka, it was on the slope of Gijakuta, while the Buddha was wandering around, that Devadatta hurled at him a mighty stone to kill him. However, the Buddha was not, he did not get injured except sprinkle injured on his feet. And those are kind of, this story that the Devadatta attempt of killing the Buddha, you will see many of the temples, the monasteries with the mural painting also. At the Gijakuta, the Buddha delivered some well-known suttas, including the Attanatiya Suttas, the Magga Sutta, Dhammika Suttas, Chalavijati Suttas, the discourse on the 7 Aparihaniya Dhamma, and the Maha Sarupama Sutta. Some teachings were given to the monastic community, such as the Bhikkhu Aparihaniya Sutta, which the discourse, the sutta dealing with the conditions for no decline among the monks. And Attanatiya Sutta, it's dealing with the devas or deities. On the other hand, the Magga Sutta concerned with the ethics of the lay people. Perhaps the most famous sutta given on the Gijakuta was the Surakkata Sutta. It's a kind of a dialogue or discussion happened between the Sariputta and the Buddha, actually. So what all this mean is that the Gijakuta is not just a place for the Buddha for his personal retreat or monastic space for Sangha monastic community activities, but also Gijakuta was a very, very busy Dhamma hall where people from all walk of life, all sorts of people, including non-human beings, come to visit seeking the guidance, counseling, and the Dhamma and the spiritual solace of the Buddha. Among those who visited the Buddha on Gijakuta are the Brahma Sahampati. The Brahma Sahampati, said to be the most senior Mahabrahmas, or the deities or gods, who visited the Buddha when he attained enlightenment. And he, the Brahma Sahampati, actually encouraged the Buddha to teach the Dhamma when the Buddha was reluctant to teach. Kassapa Gutta Dhammangs and Abhaya Kumara, and so on and so forth. One thing that you may notice, the most visitor to the Buddha on Gijakuta were non-human beings. By non-human beings, I mean the devas, the divine being or deities, gods of different rank of Bhumi in the Buddhist cosmology. So I'm wondering why the human being was not interested to visit Buddha there. Why the non-human being, that they were so much interested on the Gijjagutta when Buddha was on the Gijjagutta. Another thing that you may notice, the words bhikkhuni, the fully ordained female monks, were not mentioned at all in all sutta that the Buddha preached at Gijjagutta. So this raises so many questions regarding Buddhism and gender discourse on or related to Gijjagutta. Anyway, so from time to time, many prominent monks were mentioned to have stayed at Gijjagutta, including the Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Maha Kashyapa, Venerable Anuruddha, Venerable Punya, Upali, Devadatta, Chunda, and Channa, and so many other monks who have took their residence, at least some extent, at the Gijjagutta. In the Vinaya, a monk is mentioned to have committed suicide as having thrown himself down from Gijjagutta mountain because he was discontented with his life. According to another account, mentioned in the Anguttara Nikaya commentary, that another monk named Vakali also committed suicide by throwing himself from Gijjagutta. However, I'm not very much convinced whether it was the same Vakali or another Vakali who committed suicide in another place, not on the Gijjagutta. Many residents, inhabitants of Rajagaha were reborn in Gijjagutta as a petas or pretas or ghosts when they died. And in due course, a vihara was erected on Gijjagutta for the Buddha and for his monk. The upper level cell were erected for the use of the monks who are coming from far, far away. The Gijjagutta was close to the Sattapani Guha or Saptaparni cave. The Saptaparni cave is an important in the Buddhist tradition, especially Theravada Buddhism, because the Theravada Buddhists believed that it was the site in which the Buddha spent some time before his death or parinirvana, and where the first Buddhist council was held after the Buddha's parinirvana. So, like its counterpart, the Mahayana Buddhism also places the Vulture Peak mountain or Gijjagutta in high position due to many popular sutras were spoken on this Gijjagutta mountain. It was one of the several cave sites that the Buddha frequently visited to his and his community of disciples for training and retreat. Among many notable Mahayana sutras given on Gijjagutta are Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutta, meaning the sutras on the heart of the perfections of wisdom, or simply the Heart Sutra. The Saddhamma Pundarika Sutra, meaning the sutra on the white lotus of the true Dharma, or simply Lotus Sutra. Surangama Samadhi Sutta, the sutra on Samadhi of the heroic progression. The Heart Sutra contains the central philosophy of Mahayana Buddhism and it deals with the notions of emptiness and the two truths doctrine. The origin of the Heart Sutra is, however, widely disputed among the modern scholars of Mahayana Buddhism. Jane Nattier, Harvard and Stanford University trained scholar, argues that based on her cross-philological study of Chinese and Sanskrit texts of the Heart Sutra, that the Heart Sutra was initially composed in China. However, other scholars contradict the native Chinese origin theory, arguing that the parts of the sutras probably composed in India before the sutra were taken to and translated into Chinese. Regardless of its composition in India, my position is that the sutra has not spoken on the Gijjakuta mountain. Even it was composed on the Gijjakuta, I would argue that it was not composed in the time of the Buddha, rather much later, perhaps during the Buddhist sectarianism. The sutra deals with the Buddha's nature and the power of the Buddha. The Lotus Sutra, the Buddha has, in the Lotus Suttas, the Buddha has become divinely internal being. According to the Lotus Sutra, actually, the Buddha attained the Buddhahood endless eons ago. However, he's still alive as a living being, even though he has attained the Buddhahood thousands years ago. And he never dies. Very strange and contradict itself, the impermanent doctrines of the Buddha. For instance, in the chapter 16 of the Lotus Sutta, it says, I quote, "Such are my divine powers. Throughout the countless eons, I always live on the Balcher Peak Mountains and many other various places." Meaning, looks like the Buddha in the Mahayana Buddhism never dies. The Bodhisattva ideal was glorified, and the Buddha is equated with the Western or the Hindu notion of God, eternal God. The concept of Ekayana and the Mahayana were also introduced in the Lotus Sutta, and thus the sectarianism was clearly reflected in this text. And I take very similar position on the composition of sutta, meaning it was not also composed in the time of the Buddha. And I'm not alone in this regard. Based on cross-textual studies, scholars of Mahayana Buddhism, such as Donald Lopez, believes that Lotus Sutta took shape in 4 phases. The Surangama Samadhi Sutra, on the other hand, deals with the transcendental nature and hundreds of supernatural powers of the Buddha. On the account of expositions of Saddhamma Puntarika Sutra or the Lotus Sutra deliver on the Gijjakuta, the Balcher Peak mountain has been particularly very popular among the Chinese and the Korean pilgrims. The last phase of the development of Indian Buddhism in India was Vajrayana Buddhism. The Vajrayana Buddhism talks about 3 turning wheels or the points of the Dhamma. The first turning wheel of the Dhamma was the Hinayana form of Buddhism, and second turning wheel was the Mahayana Buddhism, and the third turning wheel, as it claims egoistically, is that Vajrayana Buddhism. So according to the Vajrayana chronology of the Buddha's life, it is where on the Gijjakuta mountain the Buddha, 16 years after his enlightenment, gave his second turning wheel of the Dhamma or the Mahayana Dharma to the assembly of 5,000 monks and nuns, laity, and countless of bodhisattvas. No sensible people would believe such, because the numbers of participants of monks and nuns and the lay folks as 5,000 is just mere exaggeration, let alone the innumerable numbers of bodhisattva. And I do not think the Gijjakuta has enough space or design for 5,000 people, or 5,000 people would not fit there. Forget about countless of the bodhisattvas. The Chinese pilgrims and the travels of Chinese Buddhist monks in India play a pivotal role in the cross-cultural exchange between ancient India and China. They introduced new Buddhist texts and circulated new Buddhist doctrine or Indian Dharma to the Chinese clergy and provided the detailed accounts of ritual practice, prayer, and ceremonies in China. They also brought their travel account and pilgrimage experience in India. The spread of Buddhism from China, from India to China in the 1st century CE prompted a diplomatic relationship between China and India as well. Having reviewed the way Gijjakuta was portrayed, depicted, and described in Pali and in Pali sources. So let's briefly look at the traveler account of Gijjakuta. Indian Buddhism sources alone is not sufficient to understand Gijjakuta. For this, we turn into the Chinese traveler monks and pilgrims who came to India to collect Indian Buddhist texts. While they were traveling across India, making pilgrimage and visiting all the important Buddhist sites, they observed, collected, and noted in their travel memoir the important information of the places they have visited. Let's find out what they have to say about Gijjakuta. Faxian was one of the first, perhaps the oldest, the Chinese monk who traveled to India. In 399, when he embarked on his trip from ancient Chinese capital, his pilgrimage experience was recorded in his book named The Record of the Buddhist Kingdom, which provide a comprehensive information about his travel and experience in India. So beside the Buddhist historic sites about the ancient Indian kingdoms and the important places, when he arrived at the Gijjakuta, he writes in his notebook, according to the Maha Paramita Sastra, the treatise on the perfections of wisdom, the Balchar Peak summit resembles a vulture, and thus it was called the Balchar Peak. On the peak, the Buddha spent a great deal of time on retreat, meditating and teaching many sutras. Faxian asked 2 senior monks, perhaps they were guiding the Faxian, to guide him. Then he dedicated some flowers and burned incense and light a lamp in front of the Buddha, perhaps the statue of the Buddha there at the Gijjakuta. And he cried with grief and said it was unfortunate for him to have missed the Buddha and only seen his relics, which is kind of very surprising for me also. Faxian, he was very familiar, actually, the Saddhamma Pundarika Sutta, or all the important Mahayana sutras, where the Buddha was never dies, he was always there, and at the same time, and he was grieving, he was crying because he missed the Buddha. It's kind of very contradicting also. Anyway, since this was where the Buddha preached the Surangama Sutra, Faxian recited a portion of the sutra in front of Grutu. After learning Sanskrit in India for 3 years, Faxian, he took many Buddhist scriptures and statues from India and arranged for to travel to Sri Lanka. Actually, it's a whole pilgrimage, the entire travel account of his India lasted for 10 years. I'm going to conclude now. So in conclusion, for me, Gijjakuta is not only a place in Indian Buddhist history, but also the cultural and religious heritage of India. It is a history, it is a heritage, a center, and the study of Gijjakuta also suggests that to reconstruct Buddhism from Indian Buddhist discourse. I personally feel that it is the place for inspiration and motivation to walk in the path of the Buddha. Gijjakuta is the Dharma body of the Buddha. If you're in India or very close by, or if you haven't been into Gijjakuta, I would highly recommend that you should visit also. Thank you. Joy Bin, Namo Buddhaya.
Thank you very much, Bhante. Bhante Revata, for your giving such an wonderful and very inspiring touching the significance of actually discuss about what these great places and history but the period of Buddhist time. We'll have a round of about this talk by Professor Ramchandra sir. Now, with your permission, Bhante, can we take few questions?
Yes, please, Bhante. Yeah. Or anyone, or anybody wants to share anything also related to
Yes.
good.
So we will open this forum for question and answer. If you have any questions related to this topic, yeah, you're welcome to share. You can also use the chat box below. You can use the chat box. There is a hand button. There is a hand button. You can just use that hand gesture to ask the question. We didn't have to repeat any questions so far, but you can ask questions to the students. You can ask questions to them, whether they listen properly or not.
How many students do you have?
I have about 40 students in diploma and certificate course, and also about 5 researchers, scholars, programming.
And how many teachers do you have? The 40 students, quite a lot of students.
Yeah, both online and offline. Yeah. We have about 7 teachers. Seven teachers.
Okay. Excellent. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
We have some regular students who also listen to the Dhamma talk. During Vasa, we have offered a course 3 months.
Is it the place where some monks entered? They disappeared into these vulture people. They did not come back.
That's a question Bhante, from our professor. He's a teacher here. He asked about the Isigili. How does the name came? Let's say Isigili. That name has come from like the mountain has eaten couple of monks, because from the far, once they enter this mountain,
They disappear.
They disappear. In Isigili Suttas, we come across this incident. How does the Isigili name has come. Do you have any reference?
Sorry, the sound was breaking up. Actually, it was not very clear.
But we also read in the suttas, Isigili suttas, you remember?
Yes.
There are, in the sutta, Lord Buddha mentions about 500, Pacheka Buddhas, hidden Pacheka Buddhas, they lived in this Isigili mountain. But how does that perception of Isigili has come? Because we heard that the monks that entered, and once they enter inside, they disappear.
Yes, sir. Never.
So it looks like that as if they have already, yes, attained arhanship like that.
I think the numbers of 500s of arahants or Pachika Buddhas are kind of very highly standard reference point, and it can be arguable that probably it was not the 500 arahants, but somehow it was because the easy memory included as a number 500.
Yeah.
Even many some of the Burmese chronicles and Sri Lanka chronicles too mention about 500 arahants visiting to Burma also. Somehow it is a kind of it's easy numerical memory issues. I think they mention about 500 arahants. But regarding the 500 Pacheka Buddhas, which is kind of very odd to believe also.
But in the text, this appear like Pindola Nama Pacheka Buddha. He also lived like different Pacheka Buddha's name. They lived in the same place. Bharadwaja, Pindola, the names.
I think those are later added those names and numbers as Buddhism evolves. I'm sure some of the names were not in the time of the Buddha if you look at, and somehow the names actually the contemporary when a text was written. It happens almost every some of the Buddhist texts also, both in Pali and Sanskrit sources.
Thank you, Bhante, for your views on this. We have one more person. He hasn't mentioned the name, but he's called iPhone. Namo Buddhaya. Yeah.
Yes, I think almost, I don't know whether it's almost or no, but I know the most of the important Atthakatas have been translated into English. You can find the PTS edition, which is Pali Text Society in London.
Pali Text Society in London.
And the very well-known scholars of Atthakatha is Professor Sudimori from Japan. He was the perhaps only very authoritative scholars on Atthakathas, and he has written many books on Atthakathas also. One of his students, Toshichi Endo, he also passed away now. He used to teach in Sri Lanka at Keleni University, and also before he passed away, died. He was teaching at the Hong Kong University also, and his book, the biography of the Buddha, based on the Atthakatha. Check it, yeah, Pali Text Society.
Sorry, Bhante, I was muted. That was one of the Upasika from Maha Bodhi Upasika, Devrati. But there is actually, we find the Pali Text Society has done a lot of work on commentaries.
Yeah.
Whole Atthakatha, the PTS, London, they have translated the whole Tipitaka. Only the Mula or the Atthakatha. Do you have any
And
information?
sorry, Bhanteji.
I asked about the Atthakatha. Is it available in English, the entire Atthakatha?
I'm not sure whether the entire Atthakatha has been translated, but I'm sure there are some important Atthakathas has been translated into English. And some of the Atthakathas actually not in Pali, some of the Atthakathas also in Sinhalese also. We have Sinhala Atthakathas, what we call it.
So, Bhante, there is one of the Vasaka. She wanted to share something. She wrote in the chat box about this is sharing about a Dhamma sharing. In Mahayana teachings, there is a very deep, a 4-line poem that was recited with vulture peak. The meaning is like this: do not seek the Buddha who sits in this vulture peak, as the vulture peak is in your heart within. If one is to seek the Dhamma from the text, is as good as trying to dry the biggest lake with a calligraphy brush. Brush. So she just refer to the Mahayana text and this is from this Evelyn citation. It's a citation, Bhante.
I can't see. Yeah, somehow I cannot see the text on the chat box here.
I'll forward to you.
Let's see.
Like Sariputta from Nalanda.
Yeah.
Nalanda is where they speak Nalanda is a different thing. Yeah, now also. But this mention.
Okay, that's a quite interesting, yeah. Yeah, it's a Mahayana, the Mahayana Buddhist text. So it's a vulture
Yes.
pig was frequently mentioned actually as a very, very glorified also vulture pig, and which is why a lot of Mahayana Buddhists from Vietnam, Korea, and Japan, they do visit vulture pig than the Theravada Buddhists.
And for them, it is actually the setting in motion, the first teachings, like the Buddha, Dhamma Chakra, I believe there. So the focus is here, maybe, as the Buddha also said, that I only saw the path, but it's up to you. You have to practice, work on the path. Yeah. So Dharma is in our heart, and we have to make the vulture peak in our heart. So to say, Ija Buddha in our heart.
That seems to be the dialogue. The dialogue in one of the movies is called. It says that it comes from Buddhist the Buddhist philosophy. It runs like this: there is a difference between knowing, or there is a difference between walking on the path and knowing the path.
Yes. So maybe it's kind of the focus is here on the Dhamma deliverance, the Buddha nature within us, how we can use this Dhamma to get the freedom. Is it not, Bhante? Yeah. Focus maybe on the deliverance of the Dhamma through the Buddha. The Buddha shows the ways, and we use these ways to get the deliverance.
And
we have
the language. Yes.
Yeah, Bhante, please go ahead.
No, the language is used. It's used that the last two words is a calligraphy of brass. I don't know any in the Indian text use the words calligraphy. So I don't know whether this text is translated directly from Sanskrit or Chinese sources, but my impression probably from the Chinese sources, because the calligraphy used mostly in China and in Arabic countries too, not in India.
Yeah, that means maybe it's based on the Chinese root text
Mm-hmm.
when they transfer to China or the Tipitaka.
And you are saying something, Bantaji?
Yeah, we have a nun and she is a research scholar here, Sally Yashanandi from Burma. Please ask your question. From there. Yeah, yes.
Punami Bhante, thank you so much for sharing about the Pichakuda mountain. That Bhante mentioned that Sariputta and Moggallana Venerable are also from Rajagaha. Now Nalanda is also very nearby Rajagaha, but as far as I have learned, that Sariputta, Venerable and Moggallana are from Nalanda. So that Nalanda is included in the Rajagaha state or it is separate, Bhante? Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you. Was it a question or a statement? So you are from Myanmar, is it?
Yes,
Siali?
Bhante.
Okay, very nice. Buma Bayalam Tibu.
မြန်မာပြည်ရန်ကုန်ကပါဗျ
Yangungala. Oh, count up.
ဆင်မြန်မာလိုလည်းပြောတတ်တယ်
Nene Pala Purata Pumalo.
ကျမ
Inunga the Apura the Kum Purao.
မေ့ဝိုင်း
Meanwhile, Chabi.
ကျမမမေ့သေးပါဘူးဗျပြောလို့ရတယ်
Nene Loyada.
ကျမ
La Lake America, the color La Lake, no? Which is John Lake.
ကျမပါဗျ
So
ဟိုတပည့်တော်မိတာလေတာရိရှင်သာရိပုတ္တရာရဲ့ရှင်မမောက္ကလန်ရဲ့တပည့်တော်တို့သိထားတာနာလန္ဒာလိုပဲသိထားလေဗျအဲ့တော့တကယ်တမ်းသူတို့ကနာလန္ဒာလားဒါမှမဟုတ်ရင်အဲ့နာလန္ဒာကရာဇဂျိုမှာပါတာလားအသိချင်တာဗျ
Oh, Nalanda, who are Rajagahama Palo, the Katlile Rajagahalo Tina, the Katlin Nanda Tina, Wellamy. Yanguga Shuli Yanguma, she Yangu, Myo Yangu, Element Shiram Hula, Element.
ဟုတ်လဲဆိုပြီးတော့စာပေတွေမှာ mention လုပ်တာတော့များများနောက်ပြီးတော့စာပေတွေမှာလည်းမကောက်အခုလည်းပဲနာလန္ဒာနဲ့ရာဇဂျိုကခွဲထားတယ်လေဟိုမောက္ကလနာဗနေရဲ့မထေရဲ့အိမ်ကနာလန္ဒာတက်ကူထဲမှာရှိနေတာဆိုတော့လေအဲ့ဒါ Sorry, we are speaking in Burmese.
maybe better to translate in English so that the audience will benefit.
She can help you.
Yeah. You just what you understood now in Burmese, please can you share?
If you do you have this book, Siali, or anyone?
Yeah, I have that book. Great Disciples of Buddha.
Yeah, I think this has very details of this Ashing Moggallana and Sariputta's biography actually. I just got it, so I'm just rereading the books.
Okay, anyone else have any question?
It was very good. Thank you so much, Bhante. Thank you.
Oh no, Bhante, you are welcome, and we would love to hear you more. Time to come. So if we don't have any questions, I think we would just go for a kind of a word of thanks and giving our heartfelt appreciations to Bhante. Anybody have any question? So now I request our Professor Ramchandra sir, who is with me. Just have to. Sally, can you move the camera a little bit to Ramchandra sir? Yeah. So Professor Ramchandra sir is the HOD of Maharani University, and he is a research scholar. He's a Buddhist scholar, and a very great Abhidhamma lecturer and very devout Upasaka. He's been serving Maha Bodhi for many years. Now he's also a faculty in research center, and always he's next to me. I mean, just propose the word of thanks, Ramchandra sir, on behalf of all of us. I request you to give a word of thanks. Yeah, you speak. Same, it's working, huh? Yeah, you speak.
Okay, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Vandami Bhante. Vandami?
Yeah.
Bhante. So, Bhante, you have been a great researcher about Nijakuta. You said it is analogy of Nijakuta is feeling faith and respect, a deep meditation, rapture, and romanticization. The gravity has arisen. So, out of your total research about Nijakuta, what is the final conclusion about Nijakuta? Your understanding? What is the research outcome? Bhante?
I haven't made any conclusion yet.
Only dimensions. Different dimensions, because you have drawn data from the Chinese pilgrimage and the Chinese account of various non-Buddhist account also you have taken. And so far, the concluding remarks is that, okay, what is the central point towards the Vijayakuta? You told us that Buddha has delivered many suttas and it is a communal Dhamma, a daily meditation hall. Now it is very pathetic because the government of Bihar has translated this spiritual place into economic activity as a cultural tourism place. Therefore, keeping all these in mind down the line, for 20 centuries down the line, so what exactly whether the place Vijayakuta, the vibrations, the significance, and the importance?
And I look at from the point of transformation of Gichakuta, how the Gichakuta was mentioned in the earliest Buddhist sources and gradually changed into in the medieval time, and then now in the modern time, and how Gichakuta transformed into another kind of thing, which is good or bad. It depends on the individual make an opinion. Somehow tourism bring into some kind of local economy too, which is not that bad also, but it is also bad. It has some kind of ecological disasters also. Like for example, there is a book that I read probably like 10 years ago also. It's about the Laotian Buddhist history in Laos. Many of the Buddhist temples, the old temples, pagodas actually are affiliated with or with the assistance of the financial help of the UNESCO. Once you are part of the UNESCO, but there's a certain agreement you have to make it. So because they want to bring the tourists into the place, and you have to open up the restaurant, internet cafe, and the hotel business, and so on and so forth. That's some kind of ecological imbalances. There's so many species, so many trees. The trees, those are very, very rare species too, that maybe disappear from the place. So this is one of my concern also. If you any spiritual places turn into the cultural tourism spot, that it has some potentially some kind of a problem. At the same time, it does bring some economy to the local people there.
So, in the name of sustainable development, if we convert the spiritual place into economic cultural tourism place, the vibrations, Buddha for the 16 years, meditated on the vulture peak, and the vibrations.
5 years, 5 years.
5 years.
Actually, Buddha was spent 5 years, Bhante, there.
5 years.
5 years.
So those vibrations, so what will happen to those vibrations? But then you said those rapture, will vanish like that.
So it was not very clear.
Pardon?
Can you repeat, sir? Yeah.
The Sasana is for 5,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Buddha meditated, gave daily Dhammata on the top of vulture peak.
Mm-hmm.
And the vibrations during the Dhamma period. Now the vibrations today, the vibrations will be the same, or it has decreased or what?
In terms of my personal feeling of vibration, it is the same thing, but I cannot I cannot talk on behalf of other people also, regardless of whether it's become a center of economic activities. But for me, the Gijjakota will always be Gijjakota in my heart, also in my feeling, and it will never be disappear from me. It is somehow, if you visit people who have not been to Gijjakota, if you visit, you may feel completely different emotion there actually, the energy wise. It may actually regenerate the Buddhist faith also. Even though the tourism industry would say otherwise.
In 21st century, the economy is driven by tourism, especially medical tourism and culture tourism in majority of the countries.
Yeah,
But
many of the... Go
Yes,
ahead.
but I feel that place is really, really very special and remains the ever vibrant, that holy spot where the Buddhas lived and gave many suttas. And that was one of the favorite abode of Buddha. He loved that place, Vulture Peak. So I think whoever goes there, they will find inspiration. They will find certainly a spiritual vibe, spiritual energy right there. I remember even we visited, I felt so energetic there, very special. And we meditated on the Vulture Peak, and we visited those caves, Satapani caves, and the Sariputta Bhante caves, Maha Bhante caves. So those are really, really, and they will be all time in this place.
From physical wellness point of view, also it is, if you walk or hike for 1 hour, it's very good too. I mean, I hike almost
Yes.
3 to 4 miles a day every day. So and it's also very, very good for our both emotional and physical well-being. Also, that place.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it is really very significant and important place in Buddhist history. I would also request people to go there, whoever visits. Nowadays, this has become a Buddhist site, a circuit. People go and they definitely visit this place. Yeah.
I hope the Gijjakota should not become like Bodh Gaya. I know there are so many anthropological studies have suggested that there is a conflict between who want to own the for commercial perspective.
Of Gijjakota. Oh, then that shouldn't happen. Yeah, yes, but
because whenever money, there are always conflict. I'm sure there's a non-Buddhist may have interest to control. If you have selling the thing or incense, a flower, it's a lot of money too.
yeah, now in Bodh Gaya, you see now it is now control. There is no freedom. Absolutely, restrictions is there now. Even to go and offer worship and puja also there's restrictions.
There should not be any commercialization.
Exactly. Because this is a place where people find peace. They should go and meditate there. So Ramchan sir.
Today we have learnt from your the lecture the contributions of Gijjakota to Indian Buddhism, India's religious history, and the paper presented by you, Venerable Bhante, in respect of Gijjakota in the perspective of geography, archaeological perspective, and also in the perspective of Indian Buddhism. It is not only a place, it has got its own history and significance in Indian Buddhism. And the data collected from non-Buddhist sources also gave different dimensions to the historical importance of and religious importance of the place Gijjakota. So the Buddhism is a global religion, as everybody knows. And you also said there are Bhantes like Vakkali, you don't know clearly, who have
committed
suicide, and at the same time we read that he has attained arahantship, Bhante, Vakkali. And the many people who died came as Preta, lived there, and many suttas, Lota suttas, etc. So the Bhante, you have given Knowing the path is pariyati. Working on the path is patipati. And what is today's need of the hour is enough of grazing, pariyati. Start munching of what we have grazed. That is the pariyati. To lead to attain pativeda. So we learned it is a different dimensions about Gijja Kuta. Now people from today onwards, they will throw special interest in knowing more deeply about Gijja Kuta. They will
Yes.
collect data
Data.
and historical and religious importance and Buddhist perspective. What is the importance of this place? So on behalf of Maha Bodhi Research Center, and on behalf of the director of Maha Bodhi Research Center, Venerable Buddhadatta Bhante, and with the blessings of Bada Bhante and all Bhikkhu Sangha here, the lay Upasakas and Upasikas, and the audience, both offline and online, we all wholeheartedly thank you, Bhante, for your time and the Dhamma dispensation, which is very useful for us to start to understand all about further the Gijja Kuta. And we have from today onwards, we have to navigate more about Gijja Kuta and the citations and all. We immensely thank you, Bhanteji, for your excellent research dimensions about Gijja Kuta and also having this Dhamma importance of the place Gijja Kuta, because we have heard so many suttas. Okay, in the suttas, okay, Gijja Kuta means it is very important place in Indian Buddhism and global Buddhism.
Yes.
And we thank you very much for today's session and Dhamma talk. Thank you,
Okay.
Venerable Bhante.
Okay. Sadhu, 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 sadhu.
So, Bhante, may we request you to give final blessings and merits? And this.
Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakkantu sabba devata sabba buddha nubhavena sabba dhamma nubhavena sabba sangha nubhavena soda sotti bhavantu te.
Sadhu, sadhu.